Welcome back. We are at part 16 of our in-depth shadow work in Peter Walker's book, Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. We are moving on to chapter 5, which is the beginning of part 2, the fine points of recovery. So take a moment, relax. Remember, if you start getting triggered, to pause it, to do your grounding, breathing exercises, and to keep a journal and see and record what feelings come up in your body, what memories bring up, and start working with them. Okay. Chapter 5. What if I was never hit? Physical and sexual abuse are the most obvious traumas that a child can experience, especially when they are ongoing. However, much that is also traumatic goes unnoticed in complex PTSD, engendering families. This often occurs because parental acts of physical abuse are more blatant than acts of verbal and emotional abuse and neglect. This is vitally important to remember. You may never have been raped or sexually molested. You may never have been hit, but you could have been abandoned emotionally, physically, left alone for hours at a time, unattended to. You could have been ignored while you were in the room. Your parents may have been so wrapped up in their own thing that they forgot to parent you. And that's going to have an effect. Whether you end up feeling abandoned because of absentee parents or lack of compassion or lack of love, ultimately it's going to traumatize you in the end point emotionally to you as much as, say, somebody like me who was sexually molested and hit or whatever. All of that. So it's not a comparison game. Don't think of it like that. Your heart matters. Your emotions matter. Your abandonment or confusion or whatever it was that traumatized you as a child affected the rest of your life and is still continuing to, especially if you refuse to look at it because you don't think it's a big deal. If your life is unhappy, and I don't mean like you're supposed to be happy all the time, although you can be. I often find myself immensely happy these days, and I want that for everybody. That's why I'm doing this. I want it to continue for myself. It's possible. So look at your life and say, is disappointment or shame or self-loathing, regret, confusion, feeling unconnected, is your life what you wanted it to be? Is your life even able to be seen as something that you can create? If you feel these ways, there's unhealed trauma from your childhood, most likely, that you need to look into. Not just for you, but for all the people that love you. Be the best you by looking into your trauma, facing it, processing it, and then able to put it in its container safely away where it won't come out and attack you or destroy or disappoint you anymore. Life is supposed to be good. You're supposed to feel excited about it. Facts. All right, let's see. Denial about the traumatic effects of childhood abandonment can seriously hamper your ability to recover. In childhood, ongoing emotional neglect typically creates overwhelming feelings of fear, shame, and emptiness. As an adult survivor, you may continuously flash back into this abandonment melange. Recovering depends on realizing that fear, shame, and depression are the lingering effects of a loveless childhood. Of a loveless childhood. Maybe nowadays you're older, you're an adult, and Maybe you get along with your parents, work with your parents, whatever. But there's still that little child in you that comes out and feels helpless, out of control, or under the thumb of somebody else. If that's the case, it's because you weren't loved enough. Even if you may love them now and they say they love you now, those wounds didn't go anywhere. At that time, as a child, unaware of all the facts and language that we use to describe childhood trauma, you as a child didn't feel seen and loved, and it affected you. Without such understanding, your crucial unmet needs as a child for comforting human connection can strand you in a great deal of unnecessary suffering, and for the rest of your life. Denial and minimization. Confronting denial is no small task. It's a huge, massive, fucking huge mountain. And it can seem so overwhelming you will try to pretend it doesn't matter. Make it matter. Because you matter. You're worthy. So make yourself your priority in this healing. Confronting denial is no small task. Children so need to believe that their parents love and care for them, that they will deny and minimize away evidence of the most egregious neglect and abuse. Deminimization is a crucial aspect of confronting denial. It is the process by which a person deconstructs the defense of making light of his childhood traumas. This lifelong process of deminimizing the impact of childhood trauma is like peeling a very slippery and caustic onion. The outer layer for some is the stark physical evidence of abuse. Example, sexual abuse or excessive corporal punishment. Subsequent layers involve verbal, spiritual, and emotional abuse. Core layers have to do with verbal, spiritual, and emotional neglect. In a perversely ironic way, my parents' physical abuse of me was a blessing, for it was so blatant that my attempts to suppress, rationalize, make light of, and laugh it off lost their power in adolescence. Same thing happened to me. There's covert abuse, and then there's the blatant abuse. And I will say this for my mother. I was always weary of her. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So it was a blessing because later on, when it came to covert abuse, it was so confusing, and I, being codependent and screwed up, often blame myself. Oh, it must be me. I'm doing something wrong. They're mad at me and it's my fault or whatever. But looking back, I agree. When it came to my mom, I'm like, woman was always mad. Woman was always negative, looking to nitpick or whatever, and seeming to really get a kick out of letting you know how little she thought of you or point out every mistake. She'd get this weird little grin on her face and do this. Stuff like that. So yeah, I totally get what he's saying here. At least I didn't have to get confused about the blatant disregard I was receiving. Let's see. It is where were we? Yeah. Deminimization is a crucial aspect of confronting denial. We were already there. The outer layer for some is the stark physical evidence of abuse, the sexual abuse, or excessive corporal punishment. Subsequent layers involve verbal, spiritual, and emotional abuse. Write down anything any memories that come up or feelings that come up and investigate those as I say these things. Core layers have to do with verbal, spiritual, and emotional neglect. In a perversely ironic way, my parents' physical abuse of me was a blessing, for it was so blatant that my attempts to suppress, rationalize, make light of, and laugh it off lost their power in adolescence, and I was able to see my father for the bully that he was. Seeing my idolized mother's abusiveness came much later. Identifying my father's behavior as abusive eventually helped me become aware of less blatant aspects of my parents' oppression. And I subsequently discovered the verbal and emotional abuse layers of the onion of my childhood abandonment. Things like, for example, I remember I desperately wanted my mother to hug me, to the point that it took me weeks to finally just ask her to hug me. She retorted with a very annoyed look and very quickly kind of on my back, and then, no body contact, no actual hug. This was in my teens when I was very angry. Well, actually, that was in my early 20s, already out of the house. But you still need your mother. And moments like that, which had happened previously in my younger years, was very shameful and just destroyed you. That's abuse. So really investigate the type of things, even if they seem stupid. For example, and then I'll move on. Stupid example, which is why I totally allowed myself to have all the vanilla ice cream I wanted for years there as I started to heal. That was one of the things I gave my child, my little kid self inside. Because as a child, my brother and my mother, they could have the ice cream all they wanted, and my grandmother could have her sherbet all she wanted, but this bitch didn't get nothing. And stupid shit like that really messes with you. Like, really messes with you. So that's what I mean about no stupid example. Really start looking back and ask your consciousness to show you these wounds. And remember, you were a child. So a hug or a fucking bowl of ice cream, it's gonna matter. Because you were a child. So, good luck with that journaling. Let's see. Okay. Identifying my father's behavior as abusive eventually helped me become aware of less blatant aspects of my parents' oppression. Oppression is a major thing. Like, if you were never allowed to stand up for yourself or say no or be angry as a child, think about it. Did they ever let you be angry? Ever let you say no? If you weren't allowed those things, that's abuse, and it messed you up. And I subsequently discovered the verbal and emotional abuse layers of the onion of my childhood abandonment. Verbal and emotional abuse. The fact that a verbal and emotional abuse can be traumatic is lost on many childhood trauma victims, though it is rarely lost on recovering victims of cult brainwashing. Whoa, what? Okay, wait, let me repeat that. I think I skipped a line. The fact that verbal and emotional abuse can be traumatic is lost on many childhood trauma victims, though it is rarely lost on recovering victims of cult brainwashing who also are prone to developing complex PTSD. Okay, I guess I did read that right. Whoa. Many survivors of verbal and emotional abuse never learn to validate its soul damaging effects. That's how much that messed you up, all the way to your soul. They never accurately assign current time suffering to it. Attempts to acknowledge it are typically blindsided with thoughts that it was nothing compared to kids who were repeatedly beaten, who had it so much worse. As a child, I minimized my father's frequent face slapping by comparing it to my friend's father, who used to punch him. Much later, however, I finally realized that for me and many of my clients, verbal and emotional abuse damaged us much more than our physical abuse. Yeah. Because when you're verbally put down and ridiculed and demoralized, it's the type of thing that you'd rather get hit. You'd rather, please, somebody, just give me a bruise. I'd rather be able to see the pain on me than just feel the rawness of it and look fine. That'll make you feel crazy. Because then nobody fucking knows how bad and small you've been made to feel. But your soul is shredded. It's kind of like in another example, when my grandfather passed away, he was the world to me. He was so kind and such a hard worker, such a good man. I'm sure he screwed up. I heard all about it from my grandma. After he died, she had like 2 weeks of just telling everybody every single bad thing he ever did, because all the attention was not on her. It went to him, see, because he died. And all the attention was on his death. And that's what she did. She spent 2 weeks just talking shit. But for me, in the midst of that bullshit, I ended up going to get a tattoo on my back that said "to grieve and father," and it helped me. It helped me to have that physical, it's still to this day, this physical showing of how important he was. And it represented itself physically, visually on my body. And that makes it real. And in that place, I was honoring him and remembering him and grieving him in the midst of all the information I was being by force informed of after his death, on top of having to deal with his death. And it's the same way for people that have been verbally and emotionally neglected and abused. They're so raw and they're so traumatized, but they have no physical way of showing it. I agree. That's with Mr. Walker here. It's worse. It's worse to have no proof of the damage that is all over your soul and hence your life. Much later, however, I realized that for me and many of my clients, verbal and emotional abuse damaged us much more than our physical abuse. Ongoing assault with critical words systematically destroys our self-esteem and replaces it with a toxic inner critic that incessantly judges us as defective. Even worse, words that are emotionally poisoned with contempt infuse the child with fear and toxic shame. Fear and shame condition him to refrain from asking for attention, from expressing himself in ways that draw attention. Before long, he learns to refrain from seeking any kind of help or connection at all. That overachiever in you that may be traumatized in this way, that cares for everyone else but not for yourself, they will wear yourself out for others but ask or refuse to be helped because you don't feel that it's necessary. If you're that type of person, you really need to realize that's trauma responses. You weren't seen as a child. You weren't loved enough as a child, so that hurt. It hurt so bad that it became your way of life to avoid putting yourself in that position. You don't need nothing. You don't need to receive love. That's really sad. That's really horrible. It's like your trauma has put you in a position where you have all the love in the world for others, but not for yourself. That needs to be corrected if you are to thrive in your life. Fear and shame condition him to refrain from asking for attention, from expressing himself in ways that draw attention. Before long, he learns to refrain from seeking any kind of help or connection at all. Now, I was a stage actor for almost 20 years, so did I get attention that way? Yeah. But people always said, you don't have an ego. Like, you're not one of these prima donnas. You're so grounded, you're so humble. It took me years to accept a compliment from audience members. And all I ever wanted was, what did you think of the character? It was always about something outside of me. If they were complimenting me as an actor for giving a performance that was moving to them or profound in any way, or even funny, if I made them laugh, anything, oh, you're so funny. It took years of being in the spotlight, literal spotlight, over 100 shows. It took years for me to be able to accept a compliment. It gets complicated like that. So even if you were in the spotlight, you still got to remember, what about the basic human needs of compassion, of being able to be vulnerable without being afraid, without shutting down or refusing to go there? Theoretical neurobiology of the critic. Unrelenting criticism, especially when it is grounded in with parental rage and scorn, is so injurious that it changes the structure of the child's brain. Oh yeah, facts. Repeated messages of disdain are internalized and adopted by the child, who eventually repeats them over and over to himself. Incessantly repetitious result in the construction of a thick neural pathway of self-hate and self-disgust. Now, those words weren't your words. They were your parents' words. Yet, you internalize them as facts of who you were. That's tragic. Find yourself, love yourself, care for yourself, heal yourself from that. Over time, a self-hate response attaches to more and more of the child's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Eventually, any inclination towards authentic or vulnerable self-expression activates internal neural networks of self-loathing. What that means is that you're so stuck on what others have told you you are, that even trying to find your authentic self becomes a fight within your own brain, because all your brain knows, this computer in here is like, no, you're supposed to be this piece of shit over here. No, you're a piece of shit. No, you're not smart. You're a piece of shit and you're a dumbass. No, everybody says you're a dumbass. Everybody says you need to shut up. Oh, you're not going to speak up now? Because it literally hurts your brain to try to have that sort of authenticity of self? That's how this shit plays out. That's what needs to be healed. Eventually, any inclination towards authentic or vulnerable self-expression activates internal neural networks of self-loathing. The child is forced to exist in a clipping state of self-attack, which eventually becomes the equivalent of full-fledged self-abandonment. The ability to support himself or take his own side in any way is decimated. We're at 25 minutes. And this thing acts sketchy after 30, so we're going to leave it there because there's a lot there. So this last line, the ability to support himself or take his own side in any situation was decimated. What does that look like? If I can find it quick enough. I saw this thing on Instagram the other day. Took a screenshot of it. There should be 2 of them, so let's see if I can find them in time. Do-do-do. 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 Okay. Childhood trauma can manifest as the overachiever that is super ambitious and always accomplishes it all, but can never acknowledge their progress. The people pleaser that says yes to everything in fear of making others upset. The strong one that doesn't cry, doesn't express emotion, and keeps their problems to themselves. The perfect child who sets extreme standards for their physical body and outward appearance in order to keep up a mask. The caretaker who sets out to help everyone around them but ends up self-abandoning. A lot in this section. Lot. Keep it up. You're worth it. See you next time. Adios.